Thank you, everyone. Pleasure to be on this stage. I will just clear the elephant in the room. We know we are the last thing between lunch and you. We will do our best to give some food for thought. And what we would like to focus today is the implementation of AI in customer experience. So some of our customers' needs for us financial institutions are unchanged. So we would like to understand how we solve yesterday's problems for today's technology or future's technology. And we would like to also understand how some of the new emerging customer needs coming and how we can be keeping up with it. So I have a great panel here. I will let them introduce themselves. Stuart?
Hi everyone. My name's Stuart Gregg. I'm head of innovation and the data science team at Aldermore, a specialist lender based in the UK. I'm an AI nerd and a behavioral scientist as well, so really interested in this topic and our relationship with AI.
Hi, I'm Kerry Hilton. I head up our non-regulatory, modelling and innovation function at Virgin Money. And by background, I'm a modeller, traditional focus on more of the sort of credit risk and capital modelling, with more of a recent shift into AI, machine learning, novel algorithms. So a big focus on bringing sort of new data and innovation into the organisation.
Hi, my name is Aysara Yusupova. I work for Standard Chartered International Bank and primarily servicing commercial and corporate and institutional clients globally. I am the head of digital deployment for Europe and Americas and digital channels and data analytics. It's a bit of a mouthful. So unlike some of my colleagues here, I am not a data scientist by background. I'm a traditional banker, but I work in digital space where we provide digital solutions for our corporate and institutional clients. So it has to make sense from a banking as well as client needs perspective.
Thank you so much. Also for logistics, I forgot to say, I still don't see any questions here. So if you have any questions, if you would like me to bounce them through the discussion, please put them on the app. And if you would like to ask us the questions, there will be roaming mics at the end of the session. One of the things when we were preparing for today, we discussed, four of us, is we have in common is what we are passionate about. So we are passionate about our customers, our end users, and their experiences. And another common thing that we realize that we have is we all have a say in the roadmap of how AI will be used in our organizations. On that spirit, I would like to ask you guys, what do you think customer needs are? How do you interpret customer needs?
I'll go first. So I think from our perspective, we really map out the customer journey. So we look at where the customer's touch points are across the life cycle and identify where perhaps some of those pinch points are. So that could be delays in onboarding on processes that we've got that are mundane and you know, take an awful long time, versus things in the background that perhaps we can help support in other areas. So for us, it's very much around sort of, you know, looking at that customer journey, identifying where we can improve on that to make that customer experience better. And like I say, sometimes that will be directly with the customer, so it might be things through more the chatbot or, you know, the generative AI and the interaction with the customer, but it also might be something that sits behind the scenes that they don't realise the benefit that they're getting until they need that benefit. And I think fraud is probably a good example of that. As a customer, you expect to have that level of protection from an organisation, and things like AI and machine learning really strengthen our capabilities in that area. And as a customer, when you're impacted by it, you realise the benefit that you gain from it. But actually, it's something that most of the time will sit in the background. So we're putting a focus on, you know, how can we interact with the customer and improve their experience? But how can we also do that in ways that maybe they're not are self-evident to them?
Yeah, I mean, just building on that, I think the crucial thing that we do with any use case is we talk to the customers. Like, it sounds controversial, but you actually start with understanding their pain points, pinch points. We are quite diligent in using like design thinking. So you never start with AI, right? That's a solution. It's not a problem. You start with the challenge and you really explore it and you dig into that first. And you know, whether it's the customer or the person that speaks to the customer, they're probably the MVP of any project. You know, you might have your data engineer, you might have your data scientist, but it's the operational person that gets it that is usually the make or break for what's going to make a successful project work in the organization. And it's almost like it's like a hurdle that needs to be met for any project to go, is that we've got the right people in the business that get the problem and the ability to tie into whether it's the brokers or customers directly to deliver something through. So I think it's really important to make sure they're actually part of it in some way.
I would completely agree with that. So I think speaking to the customer directly and getting to understand what is it that they want, ultimately, as Ezra said in the opening, the needs themselves in terms of the clients and the banks or FIs in general probably have not changed, right? It's all about storing money, moving money, lending money, but it's the experiential side of things in terms of how fast they demand things, how quickly they expect things to be done, and how frictionless it needs to be. I think these things keep evolving because the technologies are evolving. And yes, I think helping the clients to resolve something does not start with the technology. It starts with understanding what is it that they actually need and then figuring out what is the best technology to complete that. And I would add that on top of like the traditional tools of marketing, whether that's surveys, whether that's interviews, whether that's workshops, now AI itself is presenting an opportunity to leverage the data you already have. It's the behavioral data, right? So there's things that we say as people, but then sometimes what we say does not go hand in hand with what we do. So actions sometimes speak louder than words. And when you have, in my role, for example, we have all of these digital platforms where clients are interacting with the bank digitally. We can see where they spent more time, what screens, what actions they do. So the data itself is now helping us to see a better picture as well.
Thank you. I completely agree, and I love we all align that we are market-driven, user-driven, and technology is there to enable. Kerry, if I can come to you and ask, given that now we all speak to our customers, and how do you think the AI adoption impacting the customer journey?
I mean, it clearly impacts all of us as customers, either as a financial institutions, but as consumers for any product. And I think that's quite clear that it's appearing everywhere in ways that we're not even aware of a lot of times. I think from a financial institution perspective, to touch on the point just made, data underpins all of this, and the use of AI enables us to extend that breadth of data, to incorporate more data in there, to make more informed decisions. So I'd like to think that the use of AI within the customer journey can improve, you know, not just the simplicity of that journey, but also the speed and the accuracy. So, you know, the journey is endless for a customer with a financial institution, from the point of acquisition as a new customer through the life of that customer, and to the point of exit as well. You know, you interact with a bank in many different ways, and that has changed an awful lot from going into a branch to a lot of financial institutions now becoming totally digital or more digital. Everybody wants different levels of interaction, and I think the one thing about the customer journey is, will you get that right for every customer? Will you get that experience perfect for everybody, or will they have the same view of how that felt to the next person? You've got your younger consumers coming through who want that, you know, I want to go in and I want to get my decision really quickly. And the use of chatbots, virtual assistants, really enables that and simplifies that customer journey. But you get your older generation, and that's the last thing that they want. They want to go and to speak to a customer. But we can still use AI in that sense. It can still enhance that experience because it can aid humans. So the humans are still very much in the loop, and I think that's a big part of what AI is, you know. And as we go on that journey, humans in the loop is key. You know, having access to information in milliseconds rather than having to trawl through, you know, reams of data or information, or even having to go back to a customer and delay that response 2 or 3 days. The fact that we can get that much quicker through the use of AI. I touched before on the fraud element. There is so much that goes under the hood in a financial institution. where AI will be quite dominant over the, in the future, and is already starting to feature to help that process. So for me, it really is a positive, and it can be a positive, I think, for all customers in some way, shape or form. Does it remove the human element? Does it potentially remove empathy? Yes. So there are always going to be, downsides to AI as well, and I think we have to remember that, and we have to think about how we address that, how we focus on that, how do we minimise that? It might be that we can't remove it, but how do we minimise that for our customers as well, to make sure that their customer experience is a positive one? And that's all that we all want. We want customers that, Virgin Money's strapline is making you happier about money. And my boss will kill me if I don't get that in there today. But that is very much what it is about. It's about making the consumer, the customer happier about money, wanting to stay with you as an organisation. And customer service. Customer service is key to that. It's not just the products and the propositions that you have. The service is what underpins all of that. And AI has a lot of value to add in that space.
I'll take a pause. Thank you. Stuart, we've discussed this. You said you're privileged because you work for a more specialized financial institution, which means you're nimbler, you can navigate easier. I'm not putting words in your mouth.
It's the theory.
It's the theory. Following on Kerry's observations on the emerging trends in how we improve customer experience, how these trends are informing your strategy, what you are doing in your bank?
So I guess one of the most interesting trends with AI, and in case anyone noticed, what we talk about as AI is so different today than it was 2 years ago, right? It's the word, we've lost control of what that means now. It's not predictive AI anymore. It's something else. So this idea of democratization of AI is there, and I think it's the most important part of the trend right now. That it's in the discourse, it's on your phone. You can do things you could not do before with it as a consumer, and I guess it should, inflate customers' expectations of what their banks can do, right? I've always observed that because financial advice is very heavily regulated, it sometimes feels like it's hard to get a straight answer from a company, and you always wonder if it's going to be biased in some way based on what they're trying to sell you. Whereas I can get a pretty decent answer from ChatGPT. It feels good as a consumer, and sometimes that's enough, right? So it's a really interesting space. Well, how do you compete with, an aggregation of the sum of all human knowledge on the internet, right? And that's a really interesting space to design for and think about how to help people navigate that. Another really interesting observation, and this is a second-hand anecdote, is that the quality of complaints banks are receiving has really increased because customers are hacking their own experience and getting ChatGPT to help them write better complaints, to the point that banks are paying out more on complaints, which is a really interesting perspective with things like consumer duty, because it shouldn't be a creative writing exercise to get to the right answer of a complaint. And ditto for things like the random processes we have around recruitment. We have to write a CV. Quality of CVs is way up now. So you're not selecting for whether or not English is your second language anymore, because you can write a much better CV helped by ChatGPT. So I think there's a really interesting space here where expectations are inflated, customers are hacking their own experiences, and your colleagues have a much higher expectation of what they can do now as well. The quality of some of my junior team members, like first drafts, it's improved so much. And I'm encouraging people to cite, I did my first draft with ChatGPT, but then I looked at it. But people really do that, and it's the sort of behavioural thing we're trying to get in the habit of in the organisation now. But I think that's just a few examples of the fact that this new AI, this generative AI, is out there, and I think it's really made things move in interesting directions that banks can't really control in the same way that you can for a model. It's the data, it's a clearer process.
So can I ask how much of it was drafted by ChatGPT?
Of that answer, none. No, that was completely off the top of the head, I promise.
Cool, then we'll take it. On interesting point on complaints and the quality of complaints being increased, which makes me think when it's an individual client, it might be easier for us to think what is the impact of the technology you use when you're enabling an experience. But Aysara, if I come to you, I know you are working with large corporates, institutional clients. Then how does it work for you? How do you approach AI-driven customer satisfaction for corporate clients?
Well, whether it's AI-driven or not, I would say that it's very complex. So when we're looking at corporates or institutional clients, it's not just that one entity that we have a relationship with. It is likely that they're multinational. It is likely that they're across different jurisdictions, different languages, and they have different personas within that organization that have different roles, that have different levels of authority. Some can only have viewing and access to balances of the accounts. Some actually have authority to initiate transactions. Some can only do salary payments, etc., etc. So it's a multitude of one customer, but within that umbrella, there's so many different behavioral patterns, data needs patterns, even, need in terms of the banking needs differences. So it is very complex, and AI is a tool to just help, right? Again, it just helps to manage the entitlements and making sure that only relevant and accurate data is displayed to a particular user or persona, that they have access to, let's say, only to certain markets or only limited functionality, and it is relevant to their role, authority level, and what have you, that is stipulated by the parent company. So it's definitely a helpful tool to navigate that level of complexity and make it relevant to each user.
Thank you. It's good to think about what can AI help us improving in customer experience. Of course, it doesn't come without the challenges. So, Kerry, I will actually input one of the audience questions into this one as well. So I would like to get your opinion or experiences with Virgin Money, and what are the biggest challenges you think financial sector as a whole facing in the integration of AI, and how you address it at Virgin. Also, one of our audiences is curious to understand from a model point of view, how do you scale it?
Okay, so yeah, AI and introduction of AI into financial institutions or any organisation doesn't come without its challenges. There was talks earlier around regulation, or in some cases lack of regulation at the moment, and how do we manage this? How do we move forward? What governance, what controls do we need to put in place? There was a lot of talk around data privacy and data protection. How do we utilise that data? I'm sure I'm not alone in the hoops that we have to jump to just to get to the point of inception of models, let alone the expansion of models from an AI perspective. That is a big challenge. For us at Virgin Money, the one that I feel the most from a challenge point of perspective is actually technology and infrastructure, and particularly legacy systems. So we are a bank, so we are Virgin Money, but we are made up of two, and actually three banks, so Virgin Money, Clydesdale Bank and Yorkshire Bank. So that gives us legacy systems across three different portfolios, but organisations in the background. So again, to implement more advanced analytics for systems that have been in place for maybe 20 plus years, they have had updates, we're not that archaic, but it does come with limitations as to what we can do. We're not nimble, we're not a startup company or a fintech that can easily adopt lots of new technology and infrastructure. That it takes time to do that, to also get the focus when you are a large, you're a tier one organisation with lots of other priorities. Everyone wants to move forward with AI, but it does take time, and it has to go against a roadmap of other work. So that is, for me, probably the biggest pinch point at the moment, is actually enabling the deployment and therefore the expansion of our models and our capabilities across Virgin Money.
Stuart, I think you were also talking about the pace of change and how it would add to those challenges. Do you want to elaborate a bit more on that one?
So it's really tricky. I mean, I guess we've thought a lot about our agility and our ability to deliver change, and the whole. But at the same time, we can't compromise on the questions we need to ask at every point in the process. what I think we try to do up front is really triage which are the things we need to, move fast and fix things on, where the speed is almost a feature of the project, and which are the ones that are more like traditional projects where we'll go through the design thinking process, but it's going to be less about prototype. It's much more around trying to deliver something with a more deterministic end. And I think a lot of modeling use cases there's discovery in there, but you're quite certain that you're building a fraud scorecard, or there's something very clear to work towards. So I think it's always understanding the right approach to the right kind of project is crucial to get the right kind of pace. I mean, one of the things I've found, especially with generative AI, is you can't create a roadmap for that. You can't, it's like anything that tries to predict where that technology is going to go or how your success is going to look like it's just not going to work. So I think you are into then an experimental space of really that like true experimentation of what will work in a certain context. And I think another enabler of pace there is when you learn something, you share it with everybody you can, so they're not all having to learn the same thing in different parts of the organization. And I think there's almost like an internal company sort of publication bias thing that goes on where we only talk about success stories. We only talk about where things have worked, but actually you need to think about the repositories for the stuff that didn't work, for the rabbit holes you went down with these things that you had to stop for whatever reason. Not because of necessarily a risk reason, just because it didn't work in a particular context. But actually that's a tough one because we don't celebrate failure in the same way. We talk about these like fail fast, but even then it tends to be quite quiet. Ironically, I tried to get like an I tried award into our recognition sort of process where people did a well-constructed experiment, but it didn't come out, but they documented it and they shared it. Ironically, that didn't work. So yeah, I didn't manage to get that one in, but I tried.
You tried, yeah. Thank you for trying. Isaiah, there's an audience question. I think it's a good follow-on to this one. Understanding these type of risks and benefits of AI change, and maybe also like testing and learning. Again, I tried a word easy to give one of our colleagues for trying something for working for one of our individual clients. How do you address this for corporate and institutional clients?
In terms of the risks and benefits, I mean, I don't think the addressing risks and benefits of particular technologies different for corporate clients versus retail, right? At the end of the day, the risk of the technology is more or less the same. So, but addressing it is as a bank, we're conservative institutions, there's a level of governance, we have an ethical AI committee, so there's no data or AI type of product or solution that's going to go out the door unless all of this governance and scrutiny has been done internally to make sure that whatever the end product is that we're going to deliver to client would not, disadvantage the client directly themselves, that they can understand what that product solution is, and then ultimately internally as well, that we understand what implications it has, whether the data that we're using for that particular solution is robust, it's accurate. There's also, how do you store that data? Is there particular jurisdictions that do not allow data sharing? And if it's a particular client that is multinational, like I mentioned before, and they want to have global visibility across all of their entities, etc., is it actually technically and legally possible? So there's a lot of and myriad of different things. So I would say it's not easy, and it is all about educating internally various stakeholders on what that technology is and what the risks and benefits are, and when the risks are present, that we are being responsible in doing the right things in terms of managing those risks proactively. And then also when it comes to the client, making sure they understand what it is. For example, if we're using something with predictive analytics, right, it's probably not going to be 100% accurate straight away. The models themselves would need time to train, and they would require a certain amount of data to be trained and reach a certain level of accuracy. So that educational component again comes into play to explain to the clients what that means for them. I hope that answers the question.
We hope to. Which brings us to a point where I'm always curious, this balance of transparency. So how much transparency is required, how much transparency is right. When I reflect on my magical experiences, if like magical experiences we hear about the Disneys and the other companies that known for, most of the time you don't know what's going on behind the scenes. So we are experiencing those wow moments because we don't know what took to get to that point. But now I'm thinking about how we use artificial intelligence, how we infuse it into how we predict, how we present, how we personalize. And that level of transparency, this is an open question to you all. How do you strike that balance?
So I'm yet to see anyone go too far on being transparent with anything in this space. You know, I think we talk about sprint reviews where more or less anyone in the organization could rock up, see what we're doing, you know, and it's crucial, especially for the business areas we work for them to see how the sausage is made. You know, they're not allowed to get away from that, and they have to be in the guts of the data and the insight as it's generated. So likewise, I think there's a kind of benefit of just cross-pollination that happens from people understanding, you know, how you go through a project, how you sequence it, how you ask the right questions. And you know, we talk a lot about diversity and inclusion. Like, unless you're including people in that, you're not really living the inclusive like idea. So I think it's a really useful tool. So sprint reviews as an example to just allow diverse perspectives to kick the tires on projects. And it feels like it slows things down sometimes. You know, the team feels sometimes nervous and exposed about presenting, but I don't know. I think once you get the habit of it, you tend to really, it's almost like a skill in itself that the team gets to build. So I think, yeah, that kind of transparency, really being radical about it is quite important.
I would make maybe a controversial point. So I agree with the notion that transparency in general is a good thing, right? So it builds trust, because that's really what people seek transparency for. But when it comes to a choice of particular technology for resolving a real problem for the client, would it matter to every single person whether you're using APIs to provide real-time balances on your mobile app? Does it matter that you're using artificial neural network or random forest model to, you know, provide a particular decision or outcome or etc.? I would argue there's probably a small segment of people there, be it retail or corporate, that would even understand what that means, let alone actively seek out and expect that information. However, what I think is really important in terms of transparency is how data is being used. I think all of us can relate to the fact that we do know AI is there, we do know all of our data, or our behavioral patterns, whatever we do on our mobile apps, on computers, etc., is being tracked and is being used for something. And I think the level of transparency in terms of how it's being used and what information specifically is being used for what ends and purposes, and explaining why, is probably a little bit more important.
Yeah, I would just echo the comments. I think the data and the usage part of it is key. In a large part, what goes on under the hood, you know, it's happening, and it's happening now, and it has been happening for a long time. If I think about traditional modelling, you know, in the more basic concepts of machine learning, regression algorithms, trade algorithms, they've been around forever, and they've always been making those decisions and utilising our data in the background. But we don't go to the level of telling our consumers exactly how we calculate that decision and the approach that we took. And I think the same concept applies for AI. And you're right, a small volume of consumers would even understand what we were talking about. But there is something to be said for transparency, for building relationships and trusts with consumers. I particularly, if I'm talking to somebody or think I'm talking to somebody, whether it's my financial institution or somewhere else, I would like to know whether that is being powered by AI and it's actually a real human anywhere in that process or not. So there are some elements where I think it's important to put the information out there, but there are certainly areas where, for me, it doesn't require the same level of transparency, and I think it's getting that balance right.
Yeah. Has any one of you managed to get that balance right organizationally? So I know we all have individually different understanding of where the balance sits. Has any one of you observed that your organizations sit on exactly the same point?
I don't have a good answer to that, to be honest. I mean, I think we're still. I don't think we've personally found the balance. I mean, I have this aspiration of being really inclusive, and people can almost opt in if they want to see these things and learn about it. But at the same time, you're not going to pull half the organisation onto a call for 30 minutes every 2 weeks. So it's the I guess it's a constant challenging yourself of are you making sure you're giving opportunities for people to get involved in this and see how these things happen, versus do people really want to get into the guts of is it gradient boosted trees, or is it? But actually being able to be accountable to anybody around your decision making process at an appropriate level is probably a really important discipline anyway. Like, even if they don't want to get into the nuances of algorithm versus algorithm.
Yeah, and I think one of the more difficult challenges will come, particularly from a credit background, and traditional modelling is built in a way and designed in a way where you can communicate to the customer the reason that you made that decision. Now, the more that we expand into machine learning and novel algorithms, and particularly things like neural networks, it's black box, that becomes increasingly more difficult. So the explainability of what we're doing becomes even more important. And it's that line between advancing our capabilities and actually the consumer, and that transparency is, I don't think that's something we've yet worked out at Virgin Money to comment on where that line is, but it's something that is a key consideration as we move across that curve and advance some of the things that we're doing.
Yeah, so it's hard to comment on that one because the technology itself is evolving. Banks and the regulatory landscape around it is evolving, and as it was mentioned in the previous sort of panel discussion, there's more and regulation coming up in terms of how you leverage AI in a more responsible way, and there's all sorts of conduct rules. So, it's hard to answer whether we got it exactly right. All I would say is we're doing our very best, and we're trying to keep up with the time and understanding what that technology means, what it presents in terms of the potential benefits as well as the risks, and being cautious in terms of, we're not a fintech. It's a very different regulatory environment for the banks. So as much as we'd like to compete with fintechs and be very agile and innovative, etc., there's a natural kind of a limit to it because of what the industry is. So then, I think all I would say is we're being very cautious and always trying to put customers first to make sure they're getting the best without that best sacrificing something else.
There's a random thought kind of just related to that, really. So I did a piece of research for a master's course last year where I surveyed attitudes to AI for people that work in financial services. So basically, people like you, right? And I gathered loads of indicators, all the personality indicators, tenure, salary, everything you'd imagine in there, and whether or not people felt individual automation risk from AI. And of all the variables I looked at, data minimization, go. Of all the variables I looked at, only 2 were sort of strongly correlated with people's attitudes to AI, whether they thought it would help or harm us. One was gender. Yeah, so I actually found that everyone in the sample was generally upbeat about AI, like more than average, but men much more so than women. And it was a real kind of, is that confidence thing? What's going on there? And the other thing that was interesting is that people's perceived self-familiarity with AI was very predictive, whether or not people felt they were familiar with it. Interestingly, I looked at whether or not people had direct experience, like the panel here, of working with AI. That had no relationship, right? So it wasn't about your actual experience with AI, it was just whether or not you felt like you got it, right? Which I think is a really interesting one, sort of takeaway. Is just, and that's part of the reason why this, if we believe, that kind of truism that, AI won't replace X, but X that uses AI will. And so it's, that whole idea that we need to get people using this more, then, proximity and just making this real and showing that, the algorithm you choose here is AI, and it's kind of boring, but it's there, it's kind of real. That's probably part of the, the embedding journey in an organization. It's just that kind of hearts and minds push that you need to do with AI too.
Yeah, and I think just touching on that, I think education is key, whether that's for our consumers, externally to an organisation or internally. Actually, the cultural change, the education that's required across an organisation to bring forward AI to the fore, to really move in that direction. We're very fortunate at Virgin Money that our CEO is driven by AI and innovation, and that's how he wants the organisation to move. So we maybe don't have such a challenge internally from a cultural perspective as some other organisations do, but it definitely is an education piece and a journey that we will probably never end. To your point, where will generative AI go, for example, in the future? Can we map that out? No. So it's probably always going to be an educational and a learning curve, but it's probably at its steepest right now in terms of undertaking that, and that includes our consumers as well as our internal colleagues.
Thank you. I have one more question here, but before going, anyone in the audience would like to take the mic on? Please.
Just a quick one, if I may change the topic and upside down for a second. Then, if you think about that, what can happen when the customer will be an AI and your side will be a human or an AI who will serve the AI at the end? What could be the experience then?
Do you mean, just to check, do you mean like, so like this whole idea that the AI is going to take the boring stuff out of your day-to-day life, and one of the most boring things we do is sit on calls with companies waiting to be, do you mean like, so people using AI to engage with companies for them? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, if there is a customer and the customer will use an AI as a kind of an entity who is serving all this problem connected to the finance, and in that case, your client at the end will be an AI that you have to serve.
Any thoughts on that? And I think these are the kind of questions we're going to come up against more and more. I think it's going to be, are we already at a place where we might not know, and that's already happening as well. You know, we kind of passed that kind of like customer service Turing test around, do we know if it's an AI or not? So I think it's a really interesting question, but I don't necessarily have a good answer to that, because I think that's part of the journey we're on to discover that. I mean, I certainly don't think it's sci-fi now to almost imagine, you know, the almost indistinguishable, especially even a voice call, you know, could be an AI at this stage. So yeah, we're probably through the looking glass on that one, and probably not even caught up to the consequences. But really interesting question.
I would say it actually is happening, right? So if you're looking at corporates or institutional clients, what they would need is data, and they will have their own internal systems, and some of them will be AI powered, whether that's treasury management system or ERP or etc. So, you know, in that sense, what's important is these clients typically, I'm saying typically because it can be a little bit different client by client, but they would connect to a bank through machine-to-machine kind of connectivity, right? So they're less interested in your online banking user journey, et cetera, et cetera. What they need is access to data. It's their own data, and then they will have their own internal systems, which are likely AI-powered, to then make sense of it and do as they like with it. So what becomes more important is that access to data, speed of you transmitting it to them, and all of that.
Does this answer your question?
Yeah, just a small comment that if you are talking about accessing the data and an AI accessing the data, then where is the risk when we are talking about? So it would be a much higher risk. So then it's not only an experience that we have to start to talk about.
Thank you. Any other questions on this side of the room? I'll come next to you.
Thank you. So I've got a more sort of here and now question for the panel. You were talking about transparency and explainability, and one area that I think would be good to get your views on is when an AI-enabled tool interacts with the customer directly, and this is based on a personal experience that I had, where I was interacting with a tool that was basically going to make a preliminary decision on something that I had a right to. I think that's where human agency, the loss of human agency, can be quite annoying as a customer, because I don't think I believed that I had a right to redress against that decision. It wasn't very clear when I was in the chatbot. And the second thing was that it almost felt as if the algorithm that was powering the chatbot was trying to take me down a road where it could reject what I was asking for. So I'd be interested in your views about transparency and explainability in that context.
So my But I think this is a really interesting one, because my personal ethical compass would be you would want that to be incredibly transparent around you're dealing with an AI agent here. So that would be my kind of gut feel. One thing as well, though, I wonder though if there's a kind of horses for courses thing here, and I wonder if individual preferences would differ hugely as consumers in terms of what we want. So self-checkout at supermarkets is a good example, right? I prefer them. Right? Don't want to speak to anybody, can just go my own speed, that kind of thing, and that's fine for me. But obviously that's not the same as like trying to raise a bereavement with my bank. I want a human then. I don't want your default journeys. So for me, as long as I'm getting things quickly, as long as it works, the happy path, yeah, that's fine. But I think, so that's why I imagine it's probably quite a complex idea based on the use case and maybe the preferences of the consumer as well.
I think that's a really good point you raise. The bereavement one, for example, is when AI works and does something well, it does it really well, and the experience can be fantastic. But in a case where the outcome isn't a positive one, or is a frustrating one because you're just going around in circles, you feel like you're getting pushed down another route, there must be an alternative. So we have to think about that. We can't just blanket introduce things like AI as the only solution. We have to look at the benefits, the use case, the value add, and the what ifs. So for me, it's a lot of the work that we focus on at the moment is very much in a proof of concept space. We look at it to understand what the benefit is, what the value add is, and do we want to move it forward? And most of it at the moment will be exploratory. But in an example like that, there needs to be another channel. There needs to be another means of contact to get that human interaction. My husband recently raised a complaint. He was trying to actually access a fraud department, and for the life of him, he couldn't even find a contact number on the website to do so. And he ended up having to ultimately email a formal complaint because it was the only way to make contact. And that is, from a customer service point of view, is awful. There has to be other channels to get into. And that's this kind of thing for me that we also need to be looking at. It's not necessarily about replacement, it's enhancement of services that already exist today.
Thank you. As promised, last question from the gentleman.
Thank you. Brilliant panel. I have a question. Some of the takeaways I've heard is really around informed consent, access to data, and ultimately leading to a positive user experience. What role, if any, do you think open banking will provide financial institutions in providing those sort of services in a really informed, consent-driven way, and obviously the data that's available off the back of that?
So open banking, I think those two, whether that's open banking and AI, they go kind of hand in hand in a sense that AI as a technology needs data. Open banking gives you access to a lot more data than something's just locked in your institution. And the good thing about open banking in general, particularly here where it's regulated, is it's quite prescriptive in terms of how consent is managed. So therefore, if I'm leveraging open banking tools, I'm already consenting into my own data being shared across multiple institutions. And then the next era comes where it's beyond open banking and it goes into open finance, right? And then it's kind of, hopefully, it's still going to be on that consent basis where I still have control in terms of which companies, whether that's retailers, utility companies, et cetera, that would have access to my data. And as long as I have that switch on and off mechanism, to ensure that whenever I don't feel like it, I can switch it off. I think that's the most important thing. But yeah, definitely, I think they go hand in hand and they can kind of fuel each other.
One thing I guess I've noticed with open, most of these sort of fintech conferences, it feels like the narrative in open banking is moving so slowly relative to the narrative on AI. And I have this sense that AI is just as a technology is moving much, much quicker in terms of adoption. And I guess I do agree that that's a really natural overlap between the data you get through open banking, but it's the customers' resistance to consent to just sharing that much information may in itself lead to a bit of a skew in the type of picture you get in the samples. And quite often you see open banking used as a last resort for thin file customers, for example. And so you can mine that data, but it's only going to give you a sort of small sample of the picture of the population. So yeah, I don't know if that's an answer to your question, but it's just a reflection that the technologies are moving at such different speeds that I wonder what that will look like. And maybe it's the next iteration into open finance that that, you know, the kind of idea of, you know, digital identities and things that might be the interlock as opposed to where we are now.
It does, thank you. I think just a comment would be, I think people are still trying to find the valuable use case for the consumer, right? And so Gen Z specifically, you know, we've done some research on it. They're very happy to connect their bank account to all sorts of different services. To quote one, you know, I run around naked on the internet with my data. So they don't have a challenge, maybe older generations perhaps. But I think as we're looking at the future generations and financial well-being and all these other things, open banking feels like it's a route to explore in terms of the consent-driven model of accessing the data for value to the customer.
Agree. I do think the privacy paradox is the thing, and that's an interesting one with consumer duty, where people will say when you ask them, we don't want to share my data, but they do behaviourally. And I think that's an interesting one to unpick from what's our duty here? Are we here to persuade them to give our data up? Is that, you know, it can't be that. So that's just one riff on that.
Thank you.
So looks like we fulfilled our promise. I feel like we are leaving you with more questions than answers we gave. I feel that is enough food for thought, hopefully. But if I would like to thank you all for coming across from all different parts of UK this morning. And I would like our audience, thank you for staying with us. I know food is out there. And if we can leave you with one thing and one thing only, let's remember, we need to be customer experience driven. We need to be driven by the market. We need to be driven by the user. And knowing how to use AI will come next. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ezra.